Federal law allows for the reproduction, distribution of copyrighted motion picture and videos without authorization of the copyright holder under a condition which is known as fair use. Fair use is allowed for the purposes of criticism, news reporting, teaching, and parody, and does not infringe upon copyright under U.S. C17 Section 107. Thank you for your time. Now let's begin. Hi, my name is C401 and welcome to my channel. This is a continuation of my last video where we're going to get to debunking the rest of MultiT0mt0m's idiocy. And I hope if you like my channel and my content, you will like and subscribe. And, well, let's get going. MultiT0mt0m, what kind of idiocy do you have for us today?
The moon is not a rock floating in space. It is a luminary, possibly made of plasma.
The moon is a giant ball of rock and metal, and if it was made of plasma, it wouldn't show the same face. The surface would be completely different every moment. We have a giant ball of plasma that we can look to see that this is in fact true. It's called the sun, and it's the most dynamic place in the solar system from a distance, constantly changing what it looks like in real time. And we do know what the moon is made of because men have gone there. Remember July 1969, and then there was a few other Apollo missions? Yeah, there's reflectors on the moon, and we can measure the distance, and we'll get to that later. Anything else stupid that you want to add, MultiT0mt0m?
It is also very close, not 238,000 miles away, as they say in the spinning basketball in the vacuum of space model.
The moon is actually quite far away, MultiT0mt0m. It is on average approximately 238,900 miles away from the Earth on average. And do you know how we know how far away the moon is? Because the Apollo astronauts left these retro reflectors on the moon, and we can tell how close it is by using lasers. And there is no spinning basketball in the vacuum of space model. There is only the heliocentric model. And that model of reality actually predicts what happens in reality. Therefore, it's a far better model than your flat earth pancake nonsense. Continue, MultiT0mt0m.
All evidence points to the moon being close because when you look up at the moon at night, you see the clouds around the moon being lit up. If the moon was 238,000 miles away, then it should light up half the night sky. This does not happen.
No, MultiT0mt0m. The reason why the moon doesn't light up half the night sky is in fact because it's really far away. Here, let me explain how the mechanics of light work in this situation. The sun is way off to the right of the screen, and the light rays come in and hit the moon. Approximately 12% of them are reflected because the moon has an albedo of 0.12. Now those photons form a shell, which is constantly expanding as the shell grows larger and larger and larger. But the number of photons per unit area of the shell greatly decreases as the shell gets bigger and bigger, as the set number of photons are now divided over a larger and larger area. And by the time the shell gets to the Earth, the number of photons that hits your eye is significantly reduced than would have hit your eye if you were only, say, 50,000 miles away from the moon or 10,000 miles away from the moon. That's the way light reflects off spherical objects in space. So, MultiT0mt0m, do you have anything else that you want to share?
The moon does not reflect sunlight, but creates its own light from within itself. You will be able to see this clearly when you zoom in onto the moon with a powerful telephoto lens. You will be able to see pockets of light emanating from the interior of the moon.
Really, Multi? Really? The moon emits its own light? Then you might want to show us evidence of this. If you know that you can find proof of it using a powerful telephoto lens, why haven't you done it? Now, let's go to actual pictures of the moon. What does that look like? That looks like a crater, doesn't it? That looks like a shadow. What about some video from the surface of the moon? If the moon emitted its own light, then there would be no shadows. Come on, Multi, think this through. Well, you're probably not going to think anything through because thinking is hard work, and you don't like hard work. You just want to spit nonsense onto the internet and hope to get paid for it. Well, just continue doing that and we'll continue to laugh at you. Do you have anything else stupid to add, MultiT0mt0m?
Also, the moon does not have craters as claimed in the heliocentric model. If you've ever seen a geyser or a hot spring, then you'll see mud bubbles like this. And this mud is boiling up. This is due to the heat and pressure from underground, and it boils the mud on the surface. The exact same phenomena is happening on the moon when it is at the waxing stage. It's just like a skin that has boils on it.
Ew, gross. Bubbling mud pots and skin. What's wrong with you, man? There is no liquid water on the moon. It would have either have all evaporated, or if there was an area in perpetual shadow, would have frozen. And that's exactly what the Lunar Reconnaissance Orbiter found. It uses an instrument called the Lunar Exploration Neutron Detector, which detects neutron flux, which can actually detect large amounts of hydrogen, since hydrogen and neutrons weigh almost the same thing. When a neutron strikes a hydrogen atom, it loses a lot of energy. That's actually how fast neutrons are slowed down inside nuclear reactors. And in craters near the poles, large amounts of hydrogen have been found to be present. But this, if it's water, it would be frozen solid. There's no bubbling mud pots on the moon. And besides, the face of the moon doesn't change very much. Water changes the appearance of surfaces over time. Now, do you have anything else to add? Anything else stupid that you want to share with us?
And the craters, some people say the craters cast shadows on the moon. This is true to an extent, because as I've said, the light from within is shining out from inside out, and once it passes the crater, obviously it's going to cast a shadow.
But MultiT0mt0m, didn't you just say the moon had no craters? And now you're saying it has craters? Here, let me play the audio of you stating that the moon didn't have craters.
Also, the moon does not have craters as claimed in the heliocentric model.
And MultiT0mt0m, that's not how shadows work. And again, you haven't proven that the moon emits its own light. And until you prove that, that's not how shadows or craters work. Any other baseless claims? Of course you have more baseless claims.
There are no craters on the moon, nor can you walk on the moon.
You just got done telling us there were no craters on the moon. Then you said there were craters on the moon, and now you're back to there are no craters on the moon and you can't walk on the moon. Well, these guys walked on the moon. Here's the video. They even drove a car on the moon. Isn't that amazing? Why do you keep pulling nonsense out of your ass, MultiT0mt0m? Well, here comes another mind turd.
Look at this cartoon image of a lunar phase, and they're trying to tell us that this is what happens during one whole month. I've said earlier that the moon does not reflect sunlight. So how does the moon phases work? It is simply the charging and discharging of the moon's energy. Waxing is when the moon charges itself, and waning is when it discharges its energy. This process is a 30-day cycle, 50 days for charging or waxing, and another 15 days for waning or discharging. All the ancient cultures used the moon as a calendar. And believe it or not, they knew more about our world than we do in the 21st century.
So, MultiT0mt0m, you don't think a cartoon can represent reality? I created an animation that simulates how shadows work, and we're going to explain to you exactly how the phases of the moon work. And all you need is moving objects and shadows. But I wanted to address something else before we start that. You said the ancients knew more than we do in the 21st century. See, thing is, don't project your ignorance onto the rest of us. The ancients knew more about our world than you do, MultiT0mt0m, because the ancient Greeks knew the Earth was an oblate spheroid more than 2,000 years ago. Alright, now let me address the issue regarding your ignorance about how lunar phases work. The moon orbits the Earth. The moon is tidally locked, which means that the same side of the moon always faces the Earth. The sun illuminates one side of the moon and one side of the Earth, and the other side is left in darkness. But since the moon orbits the Earth and the Earth rotates, the same area is not always illuminated at the same time. And the way the shadows are cast is responsible for the phases of the moon. Now let's zoom out and see how far apart the moon and the Earth actually are. They are 238,900 miles away on average, and the moon's orbital inclination is approximately 5 degrees off the ecliptic plane. This means the moon spends most of its time above or below the ecliptic plane, as we're going to see in our next animation. The next animation will show why solar eclipses are rare, and also how they work. But first, let's check in with MultiT0mt0m to see what his problem is with eclipses, or the very idea of there being a solar or a lunar eclipse.
And look at this ludicrous image trying to show a lunar eclipse. They use fancy words like umbra and penumbra, as if that will prove their bullshit theory. The sun, the moon, and the Earth do not ever line up like this, because there is no heliocentric model. The lunar eclipse is not an eclipse at all, but simply the moon resetting itself. It's resetting its energy. If you observe the moon over a period of time, then you will know that everything about the moon is cyclic.
MultiT0mt0m, just because you can't understand what words like umbra and penumbra mean doesn't mean the rest of us have a problem. Now I'm going to explain how this heliocentric model works and how eclipses happen. And I want you to watch. The Earth orbits the Sun. The Moon orbits the Earth. The Moon has an orbital inclination of 5 degrees. Now, nothing here is really to scale, but the Moon needs to be between the Earth and the Sun and pass through the ecliptic plane at the same time in order to have an eclipse. And where you see the pink is where the Moon is passing through the ecliptic plane, but it needs to line up with that blue line and pass through the ecliptic plane in order to have an eclipse. And you see how rare that actually is. And that's why eclipses are so rare. The timing just has to be right. And now, lunar eclipses are more common. Now let's address the flat Earth. I have a few questions about the most popular flat Earth models that I know you can't answer. Alright, just a few questions. What force keeps the Sun and the Moon from just crashing into the Earth here? How do you get an eclipse visible from the ground when the Moon and the Sun are supposedly at the same altitude and the same size? Why is it that we have night at all on a planet where you should be able to see the Sun at any time of day? What force causes the Sun to move in and out closer or further away to the North Pole depending upon the season? What force keeps it tethered to orbit around the North Pole at all? These are the questions that no flat earther has successfully answered. In reality, the Sun rises due east at the equinox. That wouldn't happen on a flat Earth. How do you explain that? MultiT0mt0m, an acceptable answer to all the questions about the flat Earth that I asked would be a mathematical model which has predictive capability that can predict observable reality. Because just saying, but God keeps the tetherball up in the air and makes it defy the laws of the conservation of momentum is not an answer. I believe it was Galileo Galilei said mathematics was the alphabet that God had written the universe. Mathematics is the only language that has any predictive capability whatsoever, and Kepler's laws, relativity, and Newtonian physics provide answers for why we see what we see in the night sky and why the universe looks the way it looks. Well, I think I'm done here, and I'm just going to call it a like and subscribe, and I hope to have more content shortly. Thank you for your time. This was a lot of hard work, but I enjoyed doing it. Bye.